Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time of day it is, wherever you are. Welcome to today's Grain Market Blast, where all the way from vacation, in fact, Angie will be providing us with the latest pricing flows and market moving news in agricultural markets. But before she does, I'll get the legals out of the way. Pardon me. Nothing discussed in this space is session constitute trade or investment advice or refers to any kind of endorsement by PIQ, myself, Ryan Paisley, or indeed the glamorous with the capital G, Angie Setzer. Sorry, I was trying not to choke all the way through that, and I couldn't manage.
You did great. I'm impressed. Way to go. That's
Thank
what,
you.
I have that effect on people,
Well,
honestly.
exactly.
I can't help it. So hi, welcome,
Hi.
Wednesday. It's kind of breezy here. I don't know if you can hear that or not, or if you can just hear the birds chirping or what, but, yeah, happy Wednesday, apparently. That's what they tell
Yeah,
me.
right.
So first bullet point of the day, we start with new lows. Who dis? I don't know. Corn and, wheat continue to move to new lows for the contract price. We obviously are continuing to kind of work under the guise of massive supplies that are just working, they're just lurking underneath the surface, waiting to punch the end user straight in the face as we move forward. It's kind of just the way it seems like, hey, I hope all of you are prepared to have no room. It is kind of interesting, I'm seeing this conversation amongst members of the industry and I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong at this point, just an observation in general, that, we've seen it over the last several months here where we have this continued conversation of big supply is coming, no need to be in a hurry to buy. It's only going to get cheaper. And then, we kind of continue to hear this sort of wait for it. I mean, it is coming still. It's just not there yet. And so, I'm not saying that we aren't going to see some areas of the Corn Belt be overrun with some fresh harvest bushels as we move forward. But I think, if you look around the world right now and just kind of what we're watching here in general, this idea that the farmer is kind of cornered, I don't know. We'll see. And so that it's going to be one of those things that I'm paying attention to overall is just kind of, what are we watching? Where do we head? I do feel like we are, going to see a continuation of pressure, at least ahead of the August report. And then of course we'll have to see what the USDA has to say. But one of the things that I am pointing out, kind of talking about this cycle move and some of these conversations that we're having out there, is even the farmers are bearish. And so I said this earlier today on, Twitter. I tend to believe that once my customers start telling me all of the reasons that the market needs to move lower, like if we're talking about fundamentals and suddenly it's, yeah, but what about this factor, that factor, or whatever, we tend to be nearing the end of the cycle simply because this has been a drum that's been beat for a while. Now, of course, with big crops and things like that, like we're going to have to wait and see how the cash markets respond once harvest gets rolling. But it is kind of amazing to me. It's just kind of one of these bullet points that, with carryouts as tight as they are currently projected, and as far as we are from being done with the growing season still, yes, like there are some massive crops out there, but, there's a lot of confidence in this market structure that makes me a little, hesitant. So we'll see. I know bullet point wise or information wise that is very limited in meat on the bone, but it is something where sentiment wise, I do feel like we're really just kind of beating this massive dead horse. And so we'll see. Like I have some friends that are like, never sell in August in grain. It's the worst thing, like it's just, you tend to really bottom out on some of these sort of thoughts and things. And so we'll see, how this all plays out. But at this point in time, the beatings will continue until morale improves, and morale ain't improving until we at least, until we see something different come out, in the numbers, whether that is a acreage reduction next week, potentially, out of the numbers once we get the FSA data or, something else. You are still seeing some private, analysts out there or folks that, have been well followed over the years that are maintaining that the corn crop potential is probably closer to the USDA trend than the 188, 189 that's being discussed. But we'll see. So that's really where we're at. Like I said, just kind of a continuation of the beatings will continue until morale improves. First point there. Second point over to China, and definitely something that we're going to be watching, something that we're really paying attention to, and, obviously has trade attention. We did see that Trump has said that, if they continue to purchase Russian crude, they continue to support Russia, yada, 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 they're going to be hit by these tariffs, which I'm going to imagine is not part of the conversation. And so there's obviously some worries there. We are seeing China do some things that, a lot of folks are saying, hey, this does point out or does look like they may, be positioning themselves to where they don't have to take in hardly any beans out of the U.S., or at the very least, the private crushers are positioning themselves to where they're not going, they simply can't at this point with the tariffs and the uncertainty, and things like that. And so we have seen, some continuation of significant business. There were a couple things yesterday that were super important. They got my attention. First off, China was rumored to have bought a large amount or several cargoes of beans for October movement from Brazil. And so if you'll remember, a week ago, I said, I'm not worried until we see them start buying beans, from Brazil in October. So there we go. They are. So that's something that kind of catches you. That should be the window of opportunity that we're exporting in. But because of the tariffs that are in place, the private crushers are turning to South America. We also saw the second highest tonnage of meal basically sold in one day. Yesterday it was a large amount of purchases made Jan through October, or for the Jan through October timeframe. On one hand, you could say, wow, that's a sign of great demand. But we're in a bear market, so we don't say that. We say, on the other hand, wow, that's a sign that they're not intending to pick up any bushels out of the U.S., right? So that's the story at this point right now is, well, if they're really aggressively, making these purchases of, meal from the private crushers and in the domestic market, you are seeing them they bought the fourth cargo of Argentina soybean meal, which hadn't taken place before, here until recently. It's just one of those things where it's kind of like, hey, maybe China is positioning themselves not to have to take anything in from the U.S. It just exacerbates this sort of negative idea that we've been thriving on, for a while. And obviously with the Trump threats, the lack of clarity, this, that, and the other thing, those are all bearish signs. One thing I will say that is interesting to me, just kind of talking to the folks who are interacting with traders at the ground level in China, you are seeing some cash market movement that's, showing signs that we could see increased imports. As we move ahead, you're seeing some aggressive usage of wheat and feed. You're seeing some reduction in overall supply availability. And again, like I said, big meal demand and some of these other things that are taking place in the pipeline, that's showing signs that, if there were a trade deal put together, it could benefit the U.S. in a big way, or, any sort of, if there were a hiccup in production or anything like that. And so we'll just be watching. There are some signs that China could be open to increased imports eventually, just simply because they are holding back. But the only thing that answers that is time. And unfortunately for now, like I said, sentiment is so poor, that, even if you looked at it and said, dang, that's a lot of demand, that we didn't think we had, like I said before, others can turn it and say, yeah, but that's probably just more of a sign that they anticipate they aren't going to have much in the way of physical supply available, yada, yada, yada. So, just be watching China, watching the Trump interaction. Does he really follow through on these secondary sanctions? When it comes to Russian crude oil purchases and some of these other things, that could really derail us and push us, more negative. But if you're already anticipating zero China imports from us at this point, which is kind of where the market is leaning towards, I'm not sure how it gets bearisher, but I'm sure the market will show me. Anything you want to point out there?
No, I was just, I was just chuckling to myself. I had to mute myself because there's some building work going on behind me. But, yeah, what you're saying about, it seems like on paper that we might be peak bearishness, but the market will always prove us wrong and say, actually, no, here's another leg lower.
That's just it. Like, here you go, have one more. And that's, everyone was all excited when I used to go on vacation, the market used to rally, but that's not the case anymore, because a rally would allow for quietness. Markets trading to new lows creates panic. And so here we are. Like, you should know now, I shouldn't take time off. It just means that if I leave the first week of August, we're just going to kind of continue to bottom out. But anyway, lastly here, weather, obviously paying attention to that. There's a lot of conversation out there where it's like, oh, August weather is completely benign. And unless we were just closing our eyes and ignoring forecasts, because, for us here, in Michigan is Michigan, whatever. It's, a fringe state, but is a little indicative of what's taking place in the Eastern Corn Belt. We've dried out. I was talking to a farmer of mine here this morning. And he's like, yep, last rain was like last Tuesday, Wednesday timeframe. We're dry, we're okay, we're good. But if you look at the forecast at this point, we are pretty dry with, highs in the 90s, for the next little bit. So if you're in Nebraska or whatever, you're like, oh, Angie, highs in the 90s, tell me, that's not a big deal. But for Michigan, we're low 80s. We tend to do it like barbecue over here when we finish the crop, low and slow. And that ain't gonna cut it. We're also seeing, there are some spots where it has been a bit drier in pockets of the Eastern Corn Belt, that here over the next few days, you'll probably see it give up the ghost a bit, just simply because, with the lack of moisture, and some of these things. And so that's why, like, for me, I'm hitting the brakes a bit on some of these yield estimates, not picking on StoneX directly, by any means, but, they're forecasting the Michigan crop to tie a record. There's no way. We're just not there. Like, for my growers at this point, I don't have, anyone that's predicting a much larger crop than a year ago. I have several of my growers that are predicting, a significant reduction in production over a year ago, just simply because we've had the heat, we've had the dryness, we've had, some of the earlier issues. We are seeing more in the way of heavy rain forecasts across Iowa as well. Some of these forecasts for the next week are adding another 3 inches to what was some of the wettest July weather on record. Lots of disease issues being reported. And I think you're going to see more in the way of some of these farmers, having to kind of make Sophie's choice to a certain extent. Now I'm choking up because of you. Where it's like, do we spend the extra money on inputs, on fungicide or something of this nature, which for me, I'm not an agronomist, but I always like, yes. At least one spray, just simply because it helps to protect. And I've seen in years where you suddenly lose production in a big way. There are growers out there that are going to struggle to have the cash to kind of add the extra, costs or are saying to themselves, well, is it really worth trying to add the extra 10 bushel, completely ignoring the fact that, it may end up saving them 20 or 30. And so I just, watching the weather right now, where it's been really wet and probably uses heat and could use heat and dryness. It looks like they're going to stay awful wet. And in the areas that could use probably a decent shot of rain after having been dry for a while, looks like we're going to stay dry. So, August into September, will definitely be important with how this crop finishes. And what we actually have for potential. We saw that last year where the start of August, everyone was really excited. As we worked our way through August into September, we kind of walked it back a bit just because we had turned off drier and warmer. I have no idea what happens next, but it's definitely one of those things where, like I said, right now everyone is really, really solidly on one side of the boat, and maybe they're all right, but I'm not sure I've ever in my life experienced it to where, when we lean that far, we all nail it. But yeah, at this point, not much to see here, just Trump and China, basically. The Russia, Putin, Trump situation obviously is huge. But beyond that, we'll probably just continue to beat the drum of big crops, no demand, until we get to next Tuesday and see if the USDA confirms that or denies it. But even then, probably you'll have traders argue that the USDA is slow or whatever, but, happy poor sentiment. Beatings continue until morale improves. Yay, grains.
Yay. Well, Angie, I know you're on vacation, so thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I'll let you go back to catching your dinner,
Oh,
in the
hell
lake.
yeah. I'm getting ready right now. It's sitting right there. See ya.
That monster that keeps tempting you.
Right.
But listeners, also thank you so much for tuning in. We really do appreciate you. Whatever you're doing, stay safe, keep it tight, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Much love.
Have a good one, guys.